I offered to split Instacart money fairly, but my friend demanded $45 instead. Now I feel betrayed and exhausted. OMG, why is this happening? Am I the antagonist in this scenario? My friend and her boyfriend seem to think I am. Background: I have been friends with this girl, let's refer to her as May, aged 18, for a few years, and she is currently in a relationship with my cousin, whom we will call Todd, aged 18. Although we are not related by blood, I didn't grow up with family, so I was raised alongside my parents' friends' kids and regarded them as family. We have always considered ourselves family, including his and my siblings. The situation began a couple of weeks ago when I was spending time with May during a girls' day out. At some point, May and Todd had a disagreement about something. All I know is that the night concluded with him removing his belongings from her mother's house, leading to their breakup. To emphasize, the very next day, and I am not joking, she discovered she was pregnant. While their decision is not my business, they have opted to keep the baby, and I am supportive of that choice. I aim to show her that I would be there for her regardless of the circumstances, because I recognize that this is a serious and frightening situation, especially given her current status, about to graduate, unemployed, and without a vehicle. Being aware of her joblessness, I suggested that she could join me in working for Instacart, as I rely on it as a backup when my part-time job salary isn't enough to cover my expenses, which are more about want over necessity. I invited her to work for Instacart with me just 3 days after I started, explaining that this is a contracted gig rather than hourly pay. We agreed I would give her half of the earnings from our batches and then take out 5% from her share for fuel expenses for my car, something I considered completely fair. We completed our first Instacart order together on a Saturday, earning a total of $13.56, comprising both tips and batch earnings. Afterward, she requested me to drive her 30 minutes to her friend's graduation party, which I was not invited to. I agreed and drove her there, but I asked if I could briefly stop inside to use the restroom and grab something to eat and drink, as I hadn't eaten all day and needed to drive 2 cities over to get home. May assured me her friend had no objections, so I went inside with her. I thanked her friend, whom we will call Lee, for accommodating my last-minute request because it was polite and respectful. I have known Lee for years from school. However, we never hung out outside of that context, so our relationship isn't particularly close. I will revisit this point later. After that, May and I made plans for Monday to continue with Instacart alongside Todd, so we could maximize our output and earnings. I informed Todd of our arrangement, and we all agreed to split the earnings evenly. When Monday arrived, not only did May and Todd want to participate, but now Todd's sister, whom I will call Sarah, age 17, wanted to join as well. I had no objection since Sarah and I are also very close friends, and I was genuinely excited about us all working together as a family. I hadn't seen Sarah in about a year, so there was a lot to catch up on. We completed 3 Instacart orders that Monday, stopping at 2 stores and delivering to 3 homes. I noticed how much we made: $55.44 in total. Initially, I planned to divide it among 4 individuals, but then Todd suggested we do it in half because Sarah had not participated in the shopping or delivery. She had only been in the car for the entire process. Sarah was fine with that, as she understood she was there primarily to socialize. I attempted to divide the earnings into 3 shares for myself, May, and Todd, but Todd convinced me to split it directly in half instead after I asked him if he was certain about it 3 times. When I tried to withdraw the earnings immediately upon finishing, I was unable to retrieve all of it since customers can opt to remove a tip if they feel dissatisfied with the service received. Instead, I could only withdraw the batch money, $42.63, which I divided in half, resulting in about $20 for each person. I didn't even deduct any gas money. After I transferred the funds, they asked me to stop at Panda Express, which was where they wanted to use their share of the money. I agreed since it totaled $20 for the 2 meals they ordered, given that they opted for $10 meals each. I mentioned the gas money because, in addition to stopping at Panda Express, I drove them to McDonald's, Quick Trip, and 7-Eleven without asking for any reimbursement for gas expenses. 2 days later, I received a message from May expressing that she felt she had not been compensated fairly. In my mind, I thought, of course, she would feel that way after she and her boyfriend insisted I split the money in half when I attempted to divide it in thirds. Had I done so, each share would have amounted to $18.48 from the total of $55.44. She insisted that I pay her what she believed she deserved $45.55 for her contribution, which did not make sense to me. I wondered where she derived that amount when we had earned $13 from one order and about $18.48 from the other two, which we completed together. While I was working, I received texts from both her and Todd. He accused me of ghosting them over $20, which was entirely I was occupied at work and unable to use my phone, as I work as a cashier. I messaged them back, clarifying that I was working and not ignoring them. I expressed that it was impolite and disrespectful for them to accuse me, especially since they know that I consistently repay my debts and have always done so in our past arrangements. The situation escalated because the following day, they continued to demand $45 from me. May inundated me with irrelevant complaints, saying things like, "I'm sorry I don't have two parental figures to provide money for my extravagant spending habits. I'm sorry I don't possess a car. I'm sorry I'm unemployed." First off, I empathized with her absence of a father figure, but it seemed unfair for her to project her feelings about that onto me. Secondly, the financial support I receive from my parents is between us, and I repay them every single dime of what they lend me when I get paid, so that was none of her business. Lastly, it wasn't my fault she was out of work. Furthermore, I had been in the same situation without a car just 5 months prior and managed to acquire one without any help from my parents, so I didn't feel responsible for her predicament. The main reason I started using Instacart was that I needed extra money to cover my wants, as my earnings from my job are allocated for car insurance payment to my dad. I maintained my stance that I owed her $25.63 and no more. May accused me of being very disrespectful to her, claiming she was sorry if I could not handle a little constructive criticism referring to what I had said previously. The only disrespectful act on my part was raising my voice during a call that second day because I'd reached my limit, and she wasn't listening. I did apologize for that, which was more than what she did. The following Sunday, I received a text from May saying she missed me and wanted to talk. I decided to grant her a second chance and responded that I missed her too. We agreed to discuss things, and we acknowledged that hurtful things were said in the moment, leading her to apologize. The Tuesday after our conversation, she invited me to her house to hang out with her and Lee, which I accepted. While there, I was asked to fetch spray paint for Lee, even though Lee owned a car. Being a considerate friend, I agreed. We returned to May's house, and Lee eventually arrived. Lee and May were crafting Valentine's gifts for their boyfriends. I had already made a separate gift basket for my significant other, so I did not participate in their project, which explained the need for the spray paint. Since May could not be outside in the garage due to the fumes, I joined Lee, who inquired why I had removed her from my Snapchat friends. I answered honestly, stating I was unadding individuals I didn't communicate with anymore, as I didn't see the point in keeping them added. I also highlighted that I hadn't added her on TikTok or Instagram, to which Lee concurred. The next day, I browsed my Snapchat stories and noted that Lee had posted about people unadding her without explanation and labeled them as fake. I realized this was directed at me, particularly because she shared this within 24 hours of our conversation. This past Friday, while my boyfriend, aged 20, was at my house before heading out for a tattoo appointment, May called to ask if I could pick her up and drive her for food. I replied affirmatively, but mentioned it depended on the distance, since I was waiting for my boyfriend to return any moment. She said that was completely fine. Just as I was about to leave, my boyfriend called to say he was heading back, prompting me to text May that we had to hurry, as he was 45 minutes away. She replied that it wouldn't be a problem. After we got her food, my boyfriend was only 10 minutes away from my home, and May lives 5 minutes from me. She attempted to invite me in for a bit, but I declined, expressing gratitude and explaining that my boyfriend was coming back soon, and I only get to see him once a week, maybe twice if I'm lucky, and Friday is typically when we can meet. The following Saturday, I visited Sarah for an hour, since she moved closer, allowing me to see her on some weekends. I shared with May during our previous Tuesday hangout about my plans with Sarah, and she requested to join along with Todd because he wanted to see his father. I conveyed that I would run it by Sarah, ensuring it was acceptable since the outing was initially planned between us. Sarah agreed wholeheartedly. I then set up a group chat including May and Todd to confirm their interest in attending. I proposed that I would leave on Saturday afternoon and come back Sunday. However, I did not receive any responses from either of them. On Friday, when I collected food for her, I inquired directly. I mentioned that I created the group and hadn't received feedback from either of them. May responded that it would likely be better to postpone for another weekend, citing the fact that Todd didn't even know about my visit this past weekend. I found this strange, considering it was her who told me that it was his idea to tag along. During my time at Sarah's house, I received a message from May expressing discomfort around my boyfriend, stating he interfered with our time together. I replied, clarifying that was untrue since I only see him once a week, at most twice. I told her if she felt this way about our friendship, it was up to us to resolve it, nobody else, and I apologized for how she felt about my boyfriend, but I had no intention of leaving him. My boyfriend believes she is exploiting my kindness and generosity as a person, especially considering I have a vehicle. All of this has unfolded in merely 2 weeks. I feel overwhelmed and deeply hurt, as I feel I have lost a friend. I also feel disconnected from family, given her relationship with someone I saw as family. To add to this, I am receiving mistreatment not only from May but also from her friend Lee, who seems to be tarnishing my reputation. I suspect my boyfriend is correct, and it is painful because now I only have him to rely on, as no one else is communicating with me. Sarah still supports me and is entirely on my side, though we don't converse every day. I seek advice on how to handle this. Should I confront them openly and express everything, or should I disconnect and remain silent? I am exhausted from feeling exploited and putting my trust in people I regarded as family and friends. Now, I find myself alienated with no friendships or familial support. Their social standing in our community has rendered my voice unheard, except by a select few who are aware of the situation. To sum it all up, after sharing my story, am I the antagonist for considering blocking my pregnant best friend? Story 2. Met a guy on vacation, felt destined. We got close, he had a GF, then it got weird. He had a seizure and opened up WTF? I'm confused. I met this man during a summer vacation after ending a long-term relationship of nearly 5 years in March, just 3 months before embarking on this trip. My intention for the vacation was to embrace singlehood and engage in various casual encounters. However, this man unexpectedly crossed my path. We were on the same flight, and our friend groups began chatting that very first evening. There was an allure about him that I found irresistible. He was everything I had ever desired, yet paradoxically, he was completely unlike my usual type. With his dark hair and expressive doe eyes, he captivated me. He didn't initiate conversation or display much attraction, which now makes sense in hindsight, so I took the lead and struck up a conversation. Looking at him, I sensed that a story was about to unfold between us for reasons I could not fully grasp then, and still can't now. As our conversation progressed, it was astonishing to discover that we had lived a block apart for the previous 3 years and had even been neighbors during our childhood. However, a few days later, I learned he had a girlfriend, which left me heartbroken, prompting me to cease communication with him. On the second to last day of the trip, needing someone to join me at the beach while my friends avoided the local dealers, I invited him along. He was great fun. I jokingly suggested he act gay to score complimentary items, and he agreed, making for a memorable experience. At some point, he explained that his relationship was tumultuous and ended in conflict right before this trip. He said something to the effect of, "If I were to hook up with anyone here, I shouldn't contact her again." I wasn't oblivious. I understood the implications of his words, and to admit, I felt slightly embarrassed for not considering the situation more deeply. Newly single, I didn't mind the idea of a friends with benefits arrangement. His odd behavior could be attributed to his relationship's decline. What he revealed mirrored elements of my past relationship, leading me to focus my feelings on him. Something deep down told me our meeting was fated, and I needed to see this narrative unfold. Fast forward to our hometown, where I reached out a few days later to suggest getting coffee. I reminisce fondly about that period. It was a delightful time filled with exploration and being carefree. We began meeting up occasionally during our outings, and I introduced him to my closest friend and vice versa. However, it became increasingly apparent that something was amiss on his part. His girlfriend situation was confusing from the outset. I recall one evening when we were all out together, and he was on the phone with her while I was present. It was troubling, and I often wonder why I failed to notice the early warning signs. Why did I continue pursuing this? I did see them. I merely chose to overlook them. I was not entirely blameless, having hooked up with another ex shortly before the vacation, and truthfully, I never fully ceased communicating with others while we were together. I quickly discerned who she was. He did break up with her, a decision I never coerced him into. He stated he would end things, and apparently, he did. You might be skeptical, and frankly, I still harbor doubts, but the girl quickly found another boyfriend who closely resembled him, continuing to post about him on social media even after he and I separated. I suspect she grew weary of him after investing 4 years in their relationship. I had no intention of entering this love triangle, and it wasn't until a month or two into this confusing phase that the full extent of the situation became clear. Even now, I lack the complete context. The only reason he opened up to me was that he experienced an intense seizure at his home due to anxiety or guilt, which prompted him to talk. I recognized the potential in our relationship upon meeting him during that trip. On our last day, I approached him for a candid conversation, expressing I was not seeking a relationship, but was eager to share genuine experiences with someone fun. We lived near each other, and I wanted to stay connected back home. His reaction was somewhat neutral, neither positive nor negative, and my inebriation that day blurred my memory of our interaction, but that was the essence of it. As a woman, it felt against my instincts, but I couldn't see myself dating, especially someone who might have been attached to someone else at the time. Still, I did enjoy our arrangement. Gradually, the dynamic shifted, and I sensed his discontent with our relationship. It baffled me, as he initially showcased commitment issues referencing his girlfriend and discussing their relationship's flaws. Eventually, we broached the subject, and he proposed we become exclusive. I don't think he realized how significant a request that was for me. I responded, asserting that if he desired exclusivity, he needed to refrain from seeing anyone else as well, at which point he dramatically lamented, "Oh man, now I can't date anyone." His tone struck me as odd. It wasn't defensive, but rather a laid-back nonchalance. I didn't quite comprehend his vibe. He dramatically reiterated this, and from that moment onward, we were exclusive. The label felt somewhat hollow, lacking true significance. I should mention that while on vacation, we played a game of Never Have I Ever and both confessed to having cheated in past relationships. I found solace in our shared experiences. It humanized both him and me, allowing room for errors. He often projected the epitome of a careless playboy, at least that was his attempt. Deep down, he exhibited more loyalty and care than he might admit, though perhaps I chose to see him that way. Regardless, he struggled with emotional vulnerability, unable to express genuine affection and grappling with self-doubt. This insecurity undermined him. He was an intelligent, charismatic individual whose friends envied him. Yet he felt inadequate and uncool, causing him to mistreat those around him. He frequently made backhanded compliments and selfish decisions, constantly comparing himself to others. We reached a boiling point, and things began to deteriorate. I was oblivious to what was brewing in his mind. The atmosphere felt increasingly off. I began to notice moments of manipulative behavior between us. One specific instance involved a conversation about adult entertainment where he inquired if I watched it. After confirming, he exclaimed, "Oh my God, me too. Can I show you this picture?" I looked at it, and my jaw dropped. It was as if he had requested an image from a generator that depicted the complete opposite of me, a voluptuous blonde with blue eyes, while I am a petite brown-eyed Latina, albeit a blonde. I thought, "Did you orchestrate this?" but refrained from voicing my thoughts and moved on. I viewed myself as attractive and confident. Maybe he was attempting to humble me, but that didn't resonate. Odd occurrences like this continued. He once showed me a photo of a woman with an impressive physique and claimed I could achieve a similar look by working out. "Okay, buddy." He also tried to drunkenly profess his love for me, which I would have reciprocated if he treated me like an equal. Eventually, I told him to express it soberly. A few days later, he sent me a text with a heart, but not in words, just a heart emoji. I became increasingly frustrated, and by this time, I began to initiate fewer conversations and refrain from making plans. Throughout our relationship, I had always been the one driving the planning. A week passed, and he contacted me while inebriated, questioning why I was texting him less and hadn't seen him in about a week. Earlier that same night, we had a serious conversation about my perceived distance from him, and I suggested we discuss it later. We ended up on a call where he expressed his frustrations. He persistently probed about our relationship status, requesting I sum it up in 3 words. I was taken aback. He had been hinting for some time about our commitment, and I brushed off his comments, assuming he was merely joking. The next day, he acted as if nothing had transpired, but I confronted him directly. What saddened me was I was now open to having the very conversation he seemed eager to engage in following his drunken outburst. So, I visited his home, where I felt entirely taken advantage of. He started by claiming he didn't recall anything, so I recounted our previous discussion. I brought up the topic of what we were, and he reverted to his usual nonchalance, although his expression conveyed otherwise. He suggested we go with the flow, which was disheartening. His demeanor appeared relieved, almost pleased by my willingness to consider dating him, enjoying this unsettling, go-with-the-flow approach. He then asked if we could work out together, presenting it as something he was unwilling to forego despite our serious discussion. I should have left. I can't explain why I didn't. What transpired at the gym was soul-crushing. I could see it in his eyes that day. He lost respect for me, perceiving me as annoying and less valuable. I spent the night and left early the next morning, feeling smaller than ever. Something was profoundly wrong with how he treated me. We didn't communicate for about a month, though he reached out several times, extending apologies that felt meaningless due to previous comments he made. Eventually, he grasped the situation and invited me on a date. This outing felt like my attempt to regain respect in our relationship. If he didn't regard me as an equal, I couldn't remain. It went well, and he began to lower his defenses, showcasing a warmer side of himself. It was wonderful when he wasn't unkind. We shared similarities, and I enjoyed our time together when respect was present. I sensed he was undergoing challenges, but I was uncertain how to support him. In the end, I just gave up. Our interactions became increasingly painful. Reflecting on our time together, I struggled to pinpoint moments where he genuinely cared for me. By the finale of our 6-month journey, I realized he rarely initiated plans and only focused on his issues, providing delayed responses to mine. I came to feel he hardly knew me, and when I attempted to express my feelings, I faced rejection. For a considerable time, I thought he valued our virtual connections in gaming, which I believed solidified a bond. However, during one of our last exchanges, he merely stated he used the in-game emote to express confusion. It was painful to confront how little I meant to him. Part of me still hopes that isn't entirely true. He must have valued me at some point, but ultimately, I feel he used and overlooked me. I found it difficult to voice the issues that troubled me, and I understand the challenges of mutual trust. I'm uncertain of his perspective on these events. Rather than articulating my concerns, I often retreated, attempting to evade conflict. Some might consider me overly accommodating. I seldom voice my discomfort in his words. Even when I grew emotionally weary, I continued to communicate with him as he expressed actions and sentiments I would have appreciated earlier. It was challenging. I truly liked him and wished to develop alongside him. I envisioned a future spent together. It has been roughly 2 months since we last spoke, and I want to face the reality of our situation. So, if anyone has taken the time to read this lengthy account, please share your thoughts on what transpired and how I can avoid similar situations in the future. Story 3. OMG, I might get fired for doing my job right, while a biased GM and lazy coworkers sabotage me. What a mess, face screaming in fear. I am truly reaching my limit with this situation. I am employed at a film club at my school, which provides a set monthly stipend that covers most of my rent. When I was hired, I ended up with the undesirable role that nobody wanted, and I never applied for it. This initially left me feeling dissatisfied, and on top of that, I have had a negative personal history with the new general manager. This background is essential for understanding the reasons behind my struggles at work. We were once friends. I will refer to him as S. S was part of a trio including my ex and me, and we all collaborated on a significant film project together. My ex and I spent a day working on film-related tasks without S, which led to him discovering we had hung out without him once. He reacted extremely poorly, expressing upset over our friendship dynamics, which seemed disproportionate given our ages. Consequently, I distanced myself from him, and we are no longer friends. Fast forward to a few months ago. S, now in the role of general manager, had accomplished very little. A person I strongly dislike, and whom S also used to dislike, requested to borrow a camera from our club, but unlike previous occasions, the rest of the staff was not notified. I later learned that S had communicated with another staff member, K, and they had agreed to the request without informing the rest of the team. This angered me because the individual borrowing the equipment had not been active in the club for years and was not a student. Moreover, S and K failed to inform the rest of the staff about this decision. We regularly utilize these cameras, and there are current members eager to use them, so I thought it was unjust to give the equipment to someone outside of our group. A few weeks later, my ex visited town and wanted to film, requesting equipment from us. K reached out, asking if we could lend them the equipment. I declined because we had 2 significant projects underway, and our members required the gear. I assumed the discussion would conclude there, but K secretly conferred with S, and they proceeded to lend the equipment anyway. This left me extremely frustrated because not only did they directly ask, but they also took it upon themselves to ignore the rest of the staff's input. This situation escalated when S reported me to our actual supervisor, who has the authority to terminate my employment at any time without ever having a conversation with me or the rest of the team. S essentially has no grasp of what is happening within the club, except for the information he provides to our supervisor. This did not seem like a promising way to secure my position. I was summoned to the office for a discussion, which went reasonably well, resulting in a new rule being instituted that prohibits lending equipment to non-active members. Soon after, another issue arose. K, my boyfriend, and I were scheduled to supervise one of the films from the previous semester. My job outside of school is quite emotionally taxing, and I also have responsibilities here. I typically work on Tuesdays while my boyfriend works on Wednesdays, but there was one particular day I needed to take a mental health break, and Kay was required to be present on set. Unfortunately, that was the only day they attended set for about 6 weeks of filming. This frustrated me because they had contributed little all semester, while I was juggling 2 jobs and a full course load. I felt burnt out and agitated. Yet, I refrained from mentioning this to our advisor to avoid appearing confrontational, but I did express my concerns to some friends on staff. Now, a new complication arose when 2 staff members, including S, were let go due to graduation, leaving us with only 4 staff members instead of 6. Our advisor did not inform us of this until the week preceding the start of classes, requiring us to hastily figure out who would become the new general manager. I had almost secured that job in the previous hiring round, so I reapplied, along with a friend who was new to the staff. I watched recordings of our interviews, and it was very evident that S exhibited favoritism towards her, which was apparent even beforehand. This was disappointing for me because I believed I was well suited for the position, and she mentioned I would excel at it too. However, S had been sharing his perspectives with our advisor, leading my advisor to only hear one side of the story. Recently, we hosted a 24-hour event just last weekend where we had 2 members volunteering their time without compensation. My boyfriend, the new general manager, and I were all quite ill, while Kay seemed unwilling to contribute to the event. In previous years, Kay had actively participated. However, this year they claimed it was simply too overwhelming. If Kay had shown any commitment over the past 18 weeks, I would have been more understanding, but their lack of effort meant that the workload fell on me, leading to my frustration. The one responsibility they agreed to fulfill was picking up food for us, as we were not supposed to leave the building while working, and none of us had a vehicle. At 1 a.m., while I was sorting through footage, Someone suggested ordering food, which I thought was a fine idea. Kay, however, was nowhere to be found. They were unresponsive to my calls, and it turned out they had been watching a movie instead of fulfilling their obligation to retrieve food for us. This infuriated me, especially since I had a high fever and we faced a strict deadline that was on the verge of being missed due to Esteque's earlier dishonesty regarding his tasks during the prior 3 hours. A few weeks back, we discussed whether I could transition to the marketing position instead of remaining in my current role. The entire team expressed their support for this change, but when we presented it to our advisor, he flatly rejected the idea, asserting that Kay would interpret it as a reward, despite their agreement initially. Additionally, our advisor claimed I was causing issues for the club and remarked that this had been the worst year yet. However, I know that our last general manager would never have pointed out any problems, as he was unreliable and failed to advocate for anyone. Unlike in previous years, our jobs are now uncertain for the following year, primarily due to Esteque's bias against me. I am feeling incredibly frustrated by how much work I have been doing and that I must compensate for Esteque's lack of effort. When Kay is upset at work, they often project their personal life frustrations onto the workplace, leaving me to bear the brunt of their anger. I am just at my breaking point. Our advisor is practically useless, failing to respond to emails or reach out to others on our behalf. He did not even inform us we needed replacements for our 2 most critical roles until a week prior to the commencement of classes, despite having ample time to handle it. Now, my prospects for next year are bleak because I voiced my concern that it was unfair not to prioritize our members. I did not even mention Esteque's lack of contribution, which is why I am so upset.